Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with another episode of Great Artist, Bad Day. Now, some recordings are so awful that you never get tired of trashing them. I'm thinking, for example, of, a lot of Christian Thielemann, particularly his Schumann stuff, but he wasn't a great artist to begin with. So it's sort of hard to get all worked up when bad artists perform according to your low expectations of them. On the other hand, this particular abomination, Colin Davis's RCA Sibelius stuff, is just impossible to comprehend. I actually had some contacts with people in the London Symphony who confirmed that they were very unhappy with the results of these sessions, particularly sonically. Apparently, they had problems hearing themselves. There were all kinds of excuses floating around in the classical music ether. But for whatever the reason, and I don't think it's the orchestra's fault so much, this is Davis just having a bad day. This is my locus classicus for malus dios, whatever they're called in Latin. This is a bad day. Why? Because, first of all, Colin Davis is an absolutely fantastic Sibelius conductor for the most part. I've seen him do Sibelius live. I've heard both of his other cycles. I mean, he made 3 of them. Another one with the LSO, he remade this stuff, which is also sort of a clue that everybody knew something wasn't right. And his first one with Boston, which is, of course, the best of the batch, hands down. He was young, he was fresh, he was interested and fully engaged, made a huge difference. So, we know which one to get. And that established his reputation as a great Sibelian. But then, because the digital universe was out there and the record labels were spending a fortune redoing everything digitally, this thing showed up. And it was awful. It was just awful. Now, it's not uniformly awful. It varies. It's kind of like a horrible, overcooked, gummy, disgusting sort of like bundt cake or something like that. In other words, the whole cake is horrible, but the burnt bits are even worse. It varies in horribleness depending on where you are. Symphonies 1 and 4, the first disc in here, they're not terrible. They're slow. Davis was very logy in this series. It was like he was under some sort of mind-altering drug therapy or something. He was depressed. He was down. And the energy just isn't here. But what's really inexcusable are the just horrible, awful mistakes in ensemble, which should have been corrected, which could have been corrected rather easily, too. One of the juiciest ones occurs at the end of the first movement of the Fifth Symphony, which I've talked about many times. There, the timpanist gets totally lost. I mean, totally lost. And the brass are uncoordinated. And it's just a horrible mess. The whole coda. So when that happens, when you're at like a very clear moment of horribleness, why not just redo it? All you would have had to say is, okay, guys, take it from letter W. And the timpanist would go, and you'd be in business. But they didn't. They let it go. And that is inexcusable because that's a failure not just of the orchestra and of Colin Davis, but also of the record producers who really ought to know better. They're sitting there with a score. They're following along. They knew it was wrong, and they didn't care. And that attitude is what makes me crazy about this production. It was that, and this was sort of symbolized the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s in the major label record business. As long as they shoved out the product, they didn't give a damn what it sounded like or what happened, as often as not. And that was true of the critics, too. It was just as true of the press, because I had a bit of a tiff with great, legendary penguin person and Sibelian and grammophonist Robert Layton about this very performance. And I said, Robert, you reviewed this, and there's something goes horribly wrong. And whether you like the performance or dislike the performance, don't you think you have an obligation to mention this fact and ask the question at least, or find out what the heck was going on, to see if they're going to fix it or if they can fix it, because he would have had the contacts with the orchestra or the label and whatever. And he's a very sweet man. He was a lovely, lovely guy. Don't get me wrong, he really was. But it was a question of mindset. It's what you think your obligation is as a critic. He just looked at me and said, "Oh, there you go again, David, talking about all of these details." Well, yeah, I do. We do. You care. I care. He didn't care. And that, I think, is a little bit shocking. I really do. It's not like, Furtwängler people, who say, well, we don't care about, the details because we think everything he does is so wonderful. You're starting with the premise. You know what I mean? But you know perfectly well that if someone other than Colin Davis and the LSO had made that mistake, he would have mentioned it. He would have pointed it out. He would have said something. He wouldn't have just dismissed it and say, oh, it doesn't matter. He's a wonderful Sibelian and blah, 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 boobity, boobity, boop, oopity, oopity, oop, ickety, ackety, oop, as Bugs Bunny would say. No, you do not have the right to ickety, ackety, oop this. But even worse than that Sibelius Fifth is Lemminkainen's Return. Oh my God, they just they just play the wrong rhythms, and the sound is lousy, and it's just horrible. It's just ugh. You can't believe that they allowed that to be released. I can't believe it. It's because you get the whole Lemminkainen suite thing here, symphony thing, and the rest of it is just deathly dull. I mean, Kullervo, which you'd think would be marvelous. This was Colin Davis. He redid Kullervo with the LSO, and it's one of the great ones. Fabulous. Everything's tightened up and energized and ready to go. This one is just flaccid and heavy, and it's a slog. It runs to 2 discs. That's one of the ways that it's really not having a good outing. It really is terrible. And I continue to be baffled by the general awfulness of this whole cycle, because it took them a while to do, which meant that the awfulosity sort of persisted for quite some time. It wasn't like they just had a bad day. This was like a bad year, 6 months, whatever it was, whatever the period was. It was just an embarrassment. And of course, RCA is trying to recoup its investment. They put it in this lovely box, which I have saved so I can continue to warn people not to buy it for as long as I continue to talk or have breath in me. I will tell people to avoid this. It's just horrible. Just a terrible, sad outing for all concerned. And that's the truth. So do not get Colin Davis's Sibelius on RCA. No matter how they reissue it, under what format or coupling, just avoid it. You can do so much better, so much more easily. And that's the point, really, isn't it? So keep on listening, friends. Thank you for joining me. Take care.